think. I wonder if it's a loud mic. Hello, everybody. We are live on YouTube. It is Monday, January 13th. Thank you for joining us for Solid Ground. This is our 102nd live stream and still figuring out technical stuff. Jenny Holland should be with us in just a moment. She's trying to figure out her mic, and so we were just trying to wait for her, but we'll let her join mid-conversation. And I am Leslie Elliott Boyce. I'm joined by Jennifer Friend, Christine Siefenwalk, and Deborah Knox. And again, Jenny Holland should be here momentarily. Nice to see you all today. Happy Monday and Happy New Year again. I guess we can keep saying Happy New Year for like at least 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, at least the month of January. Yeah.
Hey, Jenny. Glad you're here.
Is that any better?
It's about the same, but you know what? People just bear with us. We've got tech issues. If you can't handle weird microphone stuff, I totally understand. But if you can, we are here and we'll have a good chat regardless. It's okay, Jenny. Don't worry too much. We were just saying Jenny's mic sounded a little bit like foggy, garbly, but you know, this is the internet. It's a weird place. We'll just make the best of it. Deborah, before we get going in a conversation, you want to start us off with the intro to Solid Ground?
Sure. Am I back on? I was muting myself so I don't make the noise.
You are on, yeah.
Okay, great. Solid Ground is a peer support community. For anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice and/or authoritarian measures such as medical mandates in their workplaces, university, children's schools, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join our peer support groups for $10 a month, and you can join our forum on locals for just $5 a month. To find out more, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. Please note that Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Thanks, Deborah. So it's been a busy week in the news and a really hard week in a lot of places. And Christine is in LA, and we've been talking about the fires. This is so massive. This is so devastating. And you were saying that there's kind of this heaviness in just everywhere, this grief and sorrow, even for people who are not personally having their property affected. There's this heaviness that's hanging in the air there.
Yeah, it's really palpable. I don't live in one of the affected areas, of course, luckily, but we do have quite a few friends and a couple of family members who had to evacuate. A couple of people lost their homes. Some didn't lose their entire homes, but they lost enough to where it's uninhabitable at this point. Mm. So they're living in hotels and trying to figure out next steps. It's some of the really historic places that tourists love to visit, and just the smaller communities that people create in this big, huge city that's so spread out are just totally destroyed. And it isn't like it hit one area. The Palisades fire is what's talked about the most, but there are fires that were over in Pasadena and Altadena. There are fires that were in other places, Brentwood areas, other places of LA, essentially. And those places got hit hard, and it's just a very sad situation. And a big part of it is that we didn't have the resources to fight that many fires at one time. And in a state like California that has a lot of money, it's a fifth world economy or sixth world economy, somewhere around that area, we should have plenty of reserves to fight these fires, but we don't. And that's where it starts to get politicized, right? It's like, why was there no water in the fire hydrants? Why was one reservoir completely emptied out? Why are they not building enough dams? I mean, it opens up this bigger can of worms that's all about, where does the money go? The money that's allocated for these particular situations. Why are we not doing controlled burns of the brush when we do have the resources to do that and the brush builds up? And it's interesting because after the Wolseley fire, which was, I think, in 2018, I was evacuated during that one. It was mostly, there were a lot of homes that were affected, but you didn't see the same number of businesses that are affected the way you do with this one. And I was talking to a firefighter who said, we are supposed to be clearing the brush, but for some reason, that's been taken out of the budget. So the brush is just building up. And it was almost this foreshadowing of what was to come, just months later, which was a massive fire. And then years later, which is massive fires, plural, that we're trying to fight. And, the city of LA, the mayor has gotten a lot of heat over this. She wasn't even here when it started. And apparently there's some discussion that New York offered to send their firefighters here to help, and that was declined by the mayor. I don't know why, but it's become sort of this political issue where it really shouldn't be. It should be about humanity at this point and looking at where, the resources need to be built up. But when you cut anywhere from 17 to $23 million out of the firefighting budget in the city of Los Angeles, eventually that's going to come back to bite you in the rear end. Eventually, something like this is going to happen, and you're not going to be able to have the people or the resources to fight. I mean, there was somebody on the news yesterday, and I've been staying away from the news as much as I can. I can't sit there all day and listen to it. I just need to grab a few pieces and move on with my day. And I happened to grab this interview with this, man who was saying that he literally stayed at his house with a garden hose and just hosed down all of the perimeter of his house, and I think a little bit of the grass caught fire, hosed it down right away. And he saved his house. The neighbors' homes were all destroyed. He didn't see a single firefighter come up through the hills where he was at to put out any of the other fires. And this is not because it's the firefighters' fault. They're amazing people. It's because of the fact that they didn't have enough firefighters to hit all of the different fires that broke out at one time. So that was kind of it's been a very eye-opening. We always talk about California mismanaging the funds that we receive, and we're a very, by comparison, a fifth world economy. We've got a lot of economic resources here. Where does the money go? And that's become the big question repeatedly. And Gavin Newsom was also our governor when the Woolsey fire happened in 2018 or 2019, whichever year that was. And we had similar issues back then. So it's just devastating. And, I think that people in general are looking around. And there's some people whose homes that weren't destroyed are saying, I don't want to go back to this area and live in my house again because there's no community left. The community that we had has been destroyed. Where are our kids going to grow up? Right. So it's going to be interesting, and I think really sad to see how things go. They haven't contained all of the fires yet. So we'll see how the rebuilding process, when it even starts. There are places, homes where people were saying that they had fire insurance and their fire insurance had been canceled a few months prior because insurance companies no longer wanted to cover fire insurance in those areas. And look what happens 2 months later. Is it a coincidence? Is it not a coincidence? Is there something more happening? That's when those questions start becoming a bigger deal. What happened?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So,
which brings up the question of arson. We've seen these videos of arsonists setting fires in the area. Do you think are these just chaos makers that are jumping on the bandwagon and taking advantage of something? Or do you think that maybe this was started through that kind of malfeasance?
It could have been. They found one person at the Eaton fire who had a blowtorch on him and was talking about how he had wanted to blow up or burn down, the community or whatever. And they said that when they arrested him and questioned him further, they didn't have enough evidence to really book him on anything. And so they let him go. So I don't understand how that happened or what was behind that. It wasn't talked about much. It was just something very briefly mentioned. So I do wonder if there's some of this kind of malfeasance around all of this and an intention to destroy, for destruction. I'm not sure. But I know this one person was let go, and people were very upset by that. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe he had nothing to do with it and he shouldn't have been detained. I don't know. But making threats like that in the middle of a fire while you're standing next to the fire, it's a little bit questionable. There has to be some kind of law that was broken in a scenario like that. So I'm just kind of looking at the comments too. Somebody was writing about having lived in the Palisades for many years, and yeah, it's a tight knit community, and it's completely decimated.
Yeah, it's interesting to see just how politicized all of this has been. I mean, there's just so many comments about the political structure there, the
Yeah.
failures of government, the failures to protect the community. This is already blowing up and becoming a big political argument. But
Yes.
also, the another thing that I've seen a lot of tension online around is this idea that these are rich people and, boohoo, California rich people getting burned out of their homes, they can afford to rebuild. I mean, there's a lot of that as well, which is kind of
Which is
interesting to see.
yeah, and that's bothersome to me, and I'll tell you why. Because we know a family that only it was a like 5-person family. So there's 3 kids, 2 parents. Only one parent worked as an Uber driver. They
Hmm.
only had one car. They're stay-at-home mom. They lived in a really kind of lower middle class area, I would say. It was definitely by no means, but it was in the Altadena, Pasadena area, and their house got burned down, and they had nothing. So all of that community is sort of, I think, in some ways has not been recognized or has not been acknowledged the way that they should be. It's not just the rich people's homes that burned, but it's these other smaller communities that had homes as well that burned, or
Hmm.
businesses that have been kind of neglected. It's almost like what the news is choosing to cover is the Palisades fire, because it's the largest, but it's not the only fire where people lost homes. So I have a friend that donated a bunch of clothes and toiletries and all sorts of stuff to this family because, they left at the last second with the clothes on their back. They didn't pack a bag. They just ran out of the house, and that was it, in their one car that 5 people are supposed to be, able to share. So it isn't just that. I mean, and the fire hydrants, why are the fire hydrants empty? Why are they not working? Why are the reservoirs either out of water, or the pumps aren't working to pump the water so that you can actually use it to fight the fires? Why are they not using the budget that they have available to clear the brush, to do controlled burns, to clear the brush, right? It's all the emissions in the air, and we don't want the emissions in the air. Well, this has caused 100 times more emissions in the air than a controlled burn
Mm.
would have, and destroyed a lot more property. So some of it's policy failure, some of it is it's maybe intentional political motivations. I don't think that, it's just been completely mismanaged, and I don't think that the governor just didn't know what to do. I mean, the money was clearly allocated for these kinds of resources and given to other kinds of programs and policies that have done nothing for California but destroy
Hmm.
or make things a lot worse. I mean, the DEI initiatives that money went to from some of these budgets was horrendous. I mean, it was, let's hire DEI based people and forget about hiring like who we really actually need that's competent, and also use the money to make sure we have the infrastructure. And not that it really matters at this point, but the Olympics are going to be hosted here in the next 2 years. We don't have the infrastructure to host the Olympics. It just can't happen. We don't have the infrastructure in place to do that. So, that's very sad from a fifth or sixth world economy state as California, which is, it's a wealthy state.
When that kind of, I don't know what people think about this, but I wonder if part of the sort of negativity towards this, the lack of sympathy towards this, is there's this kind of, I think a lot of the US has an animosity towards California. There's a
Yes.
lot of anti-California. I mean, there's like a, even up here, there's like, don't California my Washington, don't California my Texas. We hear
Yeah.
those kinds of things. Like there's this resentment and this sense that a lot of poor policies that have swept throughout the US have originated in California. And I wonder, if that's driving some of the negative responses to this. And I wonder what people think about that.
Oh, I think so. I mean, there's a podcast that I follow, a political podcast, and I read the comments and stuff, and they were talking about the California fire, and people in there are like, "Well, screw you. It's because this was what you guys all voted for, so this is what you get." So there's some kind of response in that regard. But we didn't all vote for this. We didn't all vote for the Democratic agenda.
That's
I can
right.
tell you that with clear certainty that we didn't. How it turned out to be that these things got pushed through. I mean, there's a lot of different theories about fraud and about, are these elections even real elections? How many times are they finding voter fraud? And even the city, even in the election, the mayoral election, Karen Bass was not very popular by the average person's opinion of her. How did she win? Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of things and questions about that as well. So it kind of bothers me when people don't want a California a place, but I also understand what they're talking about and why they say that. It's just there's so much of California that's red, but they're not represented very well because they're not in the big cities. I mean, here it's the big cities that are really blue. Outside of that, that isn't the case. I mean, there's a lot of agriculture here, and the people that live in agriculture areas. I live in Ventura County. It's a red county, and it touches LA County. It's right next door. Like LA County's across the street from where I live. Literally, we're on the borderline. So we're red here, and we're red all the way up the coast until you start hitting some of the bigger cities again, right? So, anyway, so yes, I think it's just it's a mixed bag here. I understand the reasoning behind that, but it's not the whole of California that supports.
Well, that seems to bring up other topics. I mean, that seems to tie into other topics, like topics of immigration in general, immigration and migration, and what we do to communities when we move into them. And this is just a domestic thing, but that's a huge issue everywhere right now, changing the nature of places. Deborah, you look like you had a thought.
Yeah, I did. And I'm like, what was my thought? Thank you. Well, I was thinking just also about I guess the people are voting in the political class, but I mean, one thing that just shocked me, aside from the lack of, I feel like anyone in these executive positions should have crisis management skills, and like none of these people do. But I understand, tell me if this is correct, Christine, that the big thing that Newsom was dealing with in the last day or so was how are we going to Trump-proof California?
Yes.
Like wasn't there a gathering, like I said? So like these Democrat people they're not, these politicians are just not tracking with reality. So I can see why people would be like, what the hell is California doing? Because even in the face of just what happened, if their priority is, Trump.
That's right. Yes, yeah. That's right. And Newsom he wants to run for president, right, in 2020. What will it be, 2028? I mean, this is so. I mean, obviously, this whole let's completely anti-Trump the whole state, I think, is politically motivated for his run in 2028. After this, I don't know that he's going to have a leg to stand on, but that was a big component of it, So, absolutely.
I think that this whole fire situation is just incredibly emblematic of the total collapse of the the progressive, elite professional managerial class. I mean, it's just shown them to be what they truly are, utterly incompetent, and yet, despite their incompetence, incredibly confident and almost cocky and self-assured. And high-handed, thinking that they have all the answers. I mean, the video that went viral of the fire, I think it was just a firefighter. I don't think it was one of the chiefs, but this lesbian woman talking about how if a woman says, "Well, you can't carry my husband out of the fire," I have to say, well, I question why he got himself in that situation in the first place. I mean, this was like a publicity video for the fire department of LA. I mean, somebody okayed that.
Yeah.
Somebody okayed
it's insanity, that victim blaming.
Some person with like a PR, with a career in PR and a comms degree looked at that and said, yeah, that's the message we're going to go with. Somebody who probably gets paid a six-figure salary okayed that. Okay? And I mean, it's the perfect summation. I mean, obviously it's not the most important issue when you're dealing with this kind of devastation. But it really stuck with me. It was almost like it was like chilling, because it's the perfect summation of the sort of snide, sour, just contempt that these people have for regular people and for common sense and norms and competency. And I actually just realized I worked for the New York City Fire Department for 5 years as a speechwriter. And so I got to know their chiefs and a lot of firefighters. And I mean, to tell you, these were the best people I've ever worked with. I mean, without a doubt. And a lot of fire other departments would come and visit. And I mean, I definitely got the sense that there's a global fraternity of firefighters who are incredibly dedicated. They really focus on training. They're very altruistic, and they're very, very, very competent and capable at what they do. They're crisis experts. So I'm sure that the majority of the LA Fire Department is made up of people like this, and I'm guessing anyway. Maybe I shouldn't say I'm sure that it's the management who's
Yes.
taking a big steaming dump on that long-standing virtuous ethos of firefighters, and that
Yeah.
is just disgusting. I mean, that's just salt in the wound to all of you poor people who are dealing with the collapse of everything you know. Just it's like a
Yeah.
big steaming dump on top of it. It's really awful.
Well, a lot of firefighters quit during the vaccine mandates as well, and that became
Mm.
more important than hanging on to those people. Some retired early, some left, changed professions, whatever they did, they
Wow.
left. So you have that component too, that they were also understaffed.
Can I throw a whole other element in here, which might get people mad? No, I'm not sure. Because I've seen this also kind of coming up in the meta conversation of just where people choose to live. I mean, we were talking last night in my group of like the intense beauty. Of course, people would want to live there. And then when people live in a place where someone was just saying today, Joan Didion used to even write in the 70s about all these fires coming. It's not like people don't know there's going to be fires there. And this sort of that place of like choosing, being in a risky situation, really hoping that things can be mitigated. Of course, wanting them to be to the extent that they can. And then is there a place where like this risk is a lot higher than anyone really can afford to handle, like, or something like that. Like just reflecting, like you think in Florida when people keep rebuilding, in places where there's storms and, where is the issue of when should insurance pay for it? When should taxpayers bail out people? And so I don't want to say this in a place where someone's just hurting right now, where they don't have their home anymore and be making some sort of moralizing statement. But it was just like this kind of stepping back from the whole thing of with more, with various, it's funny where you live. Like you could go, oh no, are there earthquakes and fires? Or some places it's going to be floods. I mean, there are these situations we have to deal with natural disasters. And, the place that we are sort of almost have to be humble in the face of them, that there's a lot we can do. And even if we did it all well, we still might have devastation. Obviously, we want to minimize it. I don't know. I've just been reflecting on when we live in places. When I live in California, like I was worried about fires, but I was more worried about earthquakes. And we did have one in '89 when I lived there. And it was sort of this risk. It's like, okay, how do I price in if I want to live in this beautiful place? And then like, can I just not think there's going to be an earthquake? Like maybe they said it's going to be in 30 years, maybe not this one, like, so that's just this other factor too. Because with the insurance companies, it sounded like California put a cap on how much you could charge people for insurance because they didn't want people being price gouged. But then the insurance companies goes, well, we're just not only we're not going to make money, we're going to go under because what we're going to have to pay
much risk.
Everything, we can't even do it. So then they just leave the state. And then those people are just left like they had paid for 30 years their insurance and now they don't have a coverage anymore after all these years they put in. I don't know. There's so many factors in this. I just want to throw that in there in the mix.
Well, that is really interesting. It's like where is safe? I mean, people are blamed when they're blamed after the fact when it's like this is exactly the metaphor is that firefighter who said, well, why did he get himself in that situation? Somebody was asking, what's the context for that? Clem 62 was saying, was there more to that story? Was she joking when she said, well, I asked, well, what did he do to get himself in that situation? Was it just a bad cut? Well, I don't know because I saw it too. It cuts after that. It certainly didn't seem like a joke. To me, it did not seem like a joke. It seemed very straight. And whoever spliced that together to make a commercial for the fire department didn't use any kind of humor in doing it. It was presented as if this was just a promo for their firefighters, their fire department. And it was about showing up and having people who look like you. You want to have people who look like you show up to help you in the like, come on. I don't care what they look like. Can they lift me out of the fire? Right.
Yeah, when your house is burning or you need to be rescued or your kids or your pets, you do not care. You
You
want
don't
someone
care.
who's strong and competent and who can save you. And to try to shame people out of that is just contrary to human nature, I think.
Well, it's terrible, and
Yeah.
you can run a thought experiment real quick and say, well, what did he do to get himself in that situation? Well, maybe he was saving his kid or his dog, and he went back into a building that was
Hello.
filled with smoke, and he passed out. Well,
Yeah.
maybe
or
you can think of
or
lots
maybe
of
he was just
ways.
living in his own damn house, which caught fire.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
Right.
that's
Hello.
right.
I think that's the simplest
right.
explanation.
You're right.
Right.
And
Well,
F
exactly.
you.
There's a whole reason why they have fire and rescue because sometimes, by definition, people need to be rescued.
but if you
Yes.
extrapolate that to the large scale, it's like every time there's a flood or hurricane, a fire, it's like, well, what are those people doing living there? Why did they choose to live in that area where there was this? Well, show me a place that's perfectly safe.
Right.
I mean, people live where they live for lots of reasons, And so it's really easy to go back and blame them after the fact when stuff happens, but it does happen.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, I'm not so much blaming, but there is that issue of if something repeatedly happens, and then who's picking up the tab for repeated.
That's a good question.
Yeah. So that might be maybe the better way for me to put what I'm saying.
Well,
What's going on
the
there?
FD had a
The
piece
cost
on
of
that.
houses, the cost of insurance, the cost of just living somewhere is so
Yes.
ridiculous. Go ahead, Jenny. I'm sorry, I'm
Yes.
cutting you off.
The Free Press had a piece on that, I think, 2 days ago, and saying just that. I didn't read. I think it was behind the paywall or something. But then I noticed just basically that LA has always had a fire problem, and then Justine Bateman, who's suddenly like a big ex poster, I think called them like a clickbait rag, basically saying they were victim blaming. I don't know. I don't really have a dog in this fight, but I mean, yeah, the FP raised a lot of questions about that. I mean, I think it's a planning issue. But and LA has a long history of water corruption, doesn't it?
Yes.
Diverging rivers and kind
Yes.
of manipulating water supply in order to manipulate
Yes.
property prices and stuff like that.
If you
It's
drive
fascinating,
along
but
this one freeway, kind of in the Bible Belt of California, I would say is what we call it. You see signs everywhere that say "Stop emptying our dam" or "Build dams." "Stop emptying our water sources." "Build dams." Every other exit down the freeway where all the farmers are. Those are the big signs. Very
I saw that
anti-Newsom.
when I was there. Yeah,
Yes,
last year.
right.
Mhm.
Because there's a lot around the fact that those things aren't being built. Like money that was allocated to dams went to building a bullet train. Why on earth do you need a bullet train in California to go from northern to southern California in 45 minutes? You can do that on an airplane. I mean, there's absolutely no reason for something like that. So again, it's like, what's the thinking behind where all of the resources go, and why are they choosing? I mean, there has to be some level of not just incompetence, but willful incompetence. I mean, willful negligence, I feel like.
yeah.
I read a Twitter thread about this family, the Resniks, who apparently own and use more water than the entire city of LA in a year because of their agriculture. They own the Wonderful Company, which is like the pistachios and stuff. So they have all these farms, and they the way that they've dealt with the politicians, and they treat their employees terribly. They use immigrant labor, and they have more water than all of LA. I mean, I would like to see this. There's a documentary on it. I think it's called like Pistachio Wars or something like that. I'd like to see it. I saw a thread where someone broke down and summarized that. So I'm not a great resource for that because I just read this, but I was intrigued enough that I'm interested in learning more about it.
I see Jay Bourne wrote about the two. Oh, sorry. And the LA Times. Do you want to mention about the LA Times?
Jay Bourne.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, no, you can go ahead because you're more familiar with him. I just happened to see the guy talk this morning. So.
Oh, I didn't see the talk. Yeah, I didn't see the talk this morning. The only thing I know about him is that he's a billionaire. He didn't really need to buy a newspaper, but did because he was kind of getting tired of the political leanings of the LA Times, and sort of put out this kind of mandate that for every politically slanted article that's written about a topic, he wants to see the opposite side being written about too, so that you see both slants, the one side and the other side. He's trying to establish a more balanced paper. That's what he says. Let's see if it happens. I didn't hear what he said this morning, though. But it's interesting.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, he was sort of brought on as like what's the LA Times reporting on all of this. And it seemed like, yeah, he wants to be way more sort of neutral. He wants to be like a really good information clearinghouse for people. They were even doing some things like trying to match, like let people have little maps where they could see where they could get supplies or they could get, you know, like emergency sort of relief. And he's a doctor. And I mean, he talked about everything from like a new way of treating cancer that does involve things like chemo and more toxic approaches, like activating the killer cells, natural ones you already have, to he likes RFKJ. I mean, it was just this interesting. So if people haven't ever watched Two Way, if you go to Two Way, number 2 WAY and the YouTube channel, you can see the episode today. But he was very down on the government in California. He's very happy to work with the Trump administration, you know, like what might be happening with that, especially around healthcare. He was assembling a lot of private investors to try to help rebuild the city. He basically, people are like, what about bringing the government in on that? And he was kind of like, I don't think so. They're not going to really get it done. So yeah, his name, I think it's Patrick Soon Shiong, Soon Xiong or something like that. Yeah. So he's an interesting character. I didn't like him, as I said to the women earlier, I didn't like that he talked about like monitoring people so closely with your health records that you're constantly being like, so we know everywhere you go, what's wrong with you at any second. Like that made me nervous. But I think he's someone to keep an eye on. And I think it's gonna be helpful for like, maybe give me some hope that maybe the city could rebuild in some way. I mean, you don't know. Then again, like he said, let's bring in private equity people, and you're like, oh, okay, are they going to just milk this thing for money? You know, I don't know, but it seemed like somebody was like organizing some competent people. And he probably said the word competency like 5 or incompetency 1 million times. That was important.
You know, I don't know if this is, I don't want to, I don't know, throw a completely something out of left field, but I was in LA last year in the summertime, and I was stunned by how the condition of the city. I mean, we drove all over the place. It's huge, like you say. It was so filthy, and there was so much homelessness. There was so much. It just felt like some kind of a, I don't know, like a post-apocalyptic landscape in some places. And then I see all these videos, just I don't know how many I've seen now, of people, just random people catching homeless people setting fires. I don't know how many I've seen of little fires being set in a dumpster here and there and behind the thing and in an overpass, you know, just all these little videos. I've probably seen 7, 8 videos just of people catching vagrants setting fires. And I wonder, at what point are we just taking care of this poor care of homeless people that we call care? This, like, here, it's fine, just do your drugs, we'll give you safe supply, we won't, you know, we'll give you these things, we'll make it easy for you to live in your tents. This is what's going on in Seattle. We will not oust you from public lands if you set up tents. So the parks are just overrun with tents, with needles, with human feces, stuff like this. They won't oust them, and they keep giving them needles. They keep giving them supply and providing them what they need in order to live a lawless life. And at what point are you just hosting a whole bunch of people who really are happy to watch it all burn?
I used to work with the homeless population for a small portion of my career. So our goal was to try to house people and get them off the streets. And that was one of the most common arguments that we came up against, was people telling us, why bother when we're getting so many services out here on the street, living in the parks, living on the beach where it's beautiful, living in places that are temperate. The weather's very temperate and mild, so it's not ever too hot or ever too cold. why do we bother when we can get all of our needs met living this way, right? So you get a PO box down the street, at the little shelter area. You get a free shower, you get food, you get all the things that you need, and then you can go back to your tent, or you can bring, or people will just bring it up to the tents themselves. We used to drop off supplies constantly, and I don't want to sound like an inhumane person about homeless people, because there's a lot of issues as to why they become homeless, etc., that we don't have to get into. But they're definitely not doing anything to improve the situation, but they're promoting it, they're condoning it, and they're sort of promoting the growth of the problem. If that's what's happening in Seattle, it's the same exact thing that's happening here, because that's what I witnessed when I worked with these people years ago. And it hasn't changed much. There's just more of them now. That's the difference.
Actually, that guy that was on too, the LA Times guy, he was saying that because they paid for people to also go in hotels too, and he had got, like, I think he bought a hospital that was went out of business, and he was proposing, why don't we use this as a place for all these people with mental health issues, because the intersection of mental health and these homeless is quite high. My little Venn diagram, and was like struggling to try to like make solutions. It's like all these ways that the city. I mean, I don't know if all these people are going to get voted out or what, but.
Well, I mean, at some point, the logical conclusion of being so accommodating to people's serious, like, fall through the cracks dysfunction, accommodating that rather than really substantively helping people, whatever that would be. And I don't claim to know what that is, but I do see what's happening here with the safe sharps containers in every restaurant, and just the services that allow people and the accommodations that allow people to stay out on the streets, the decriminalizing public urination and defecation, things like that. You are inviting a community that is lawless in, who is not invested in this place and who doesn't feel like they're a part of it. In fact, feels resentful and alienated from it. And you get this very extreme dichotomy of haves versus have-nots. And so I'm watching these videos where people are setting these fires, and I'm wondering, is this what started it? Is this just an exacerbation of it? What's going on? Is it like a cancer that's killing the city, that's killing the host? I don't know. Maybe I'm going somewhere strange with that, but that's just something I think when I see this, because I see what's happened to Seattle. I moved to Seattle in 2019. No, sorry, 2009, not 2019. I moved out of Seattle in 2019. I lived there for 10 years. And in the time that I lived there, it went from, I'm sure people who were there years and years before me saw change that happened up to 2009, which they found dismaying. But just in the 10 years that I lived in Seattle, I watched as it went from this place that felt good, fun, upbeat, safe, really. I could get on, I would get on the public transit. I'd take the bus to go into downtown from West Seattle. I was in law school. I was always on the bus. I'd put on my headphones. There'd be people who would kind of harass you, but you could just ignore them. My daughters, I let them ride the public transit at 11 and 13 years old. It felt pretty safe. I'm not saying anywhere is totally safe. Now, there's no way. There's no way. It is such a disaster. It's a scary, scary place. There's gangs of people that are homeless that set up shop and harass people that pass by.
Yes.
They're just
everywhere. It's not that, and there's a comment here about homelessness in Florida being very different. People are required to go to shelters or resources. I worked in the shelters too, and we had all of those available for them. The problem is when they have mental health issues and addiction issues, and to do your Venn diagram crossover, Deborah, right? They don't stay housed. They leave, right? You can't chain them and you can't jail all of them, or there'll be no place in jail for people that commit other kinds of crimes. So there's nowhere to put them. And they walk out of the shelter. They decide they don't want to stay in the shelter. Some don't want to live indoors at all. They have an aversion to it for other reasons. They have phobias. They have a lot of different mental health issues that prevent them from doing that. So those things are available to try to get them off the street. But they also have housing that they've built that's brand new, that's been completely destroyed because they didn't address the mental health component, the addiction component. So people kept using, they kept getting mentally, ill, like their mental illness was not being controlled or managed in any way. So they would either destroy the housing buildings that they were living in, or they would just move right out of them and back on the street again. So like in Santa Monica, the average person who's homeless has been housed 5 times. 5 times they've been in and out of housing. 5 times. That's the average, right? It might be more than that now because I worked with them about 8 or 9 years ago, but at that time, that's what the average was. So we do throw money at it in that way and into getting people off the street. It's just that once they're off the street, well, getting them off the street is one big huge obstacle. It's not just because of the money or resources, partly it's because they don't want to go. And then the second is keeping them housed once they're there. And that's the other problem. So it's a really complex issue that we can't solve in the next 10 minutes. But I think there's something to be said for the fires that have been caused by some of the homeless as well, setting the dumpsters on fire and things of that nature. And so it's very plausible to think that that could have been part of the problem, or part of what set off fires in the past, at least.
Now, I wanted to mention, and I'm hearing the complexity of this. It's not simply like woke people's points of view. Like, it really is hard to solve this problem. But some people in the chat were mentioning an article that I actually started reading this morning, and I'll post it in Locals if Randall doesn't go ahead and do it, because it's called Suicidal Empathy. I think the person took the term from God's side because he's writing a book on suicidal empathy. But this guy, David, I don't know what his whole name is. I can't find it in the chat. Velazco. I follow him on Substack. But it was looking at that and also victim mentality and like this combination. I mean, I think we'd probably all agree both of these factors are just leading everything downhill. Thank you, Ray.
Yeah.
So you guys might, I think someone put a link to it in the chat. So if you're in the chat, if you're watching this later, you can either go find it in the chat when the chat comes up, or look for yourself.
You want to read the name out loud? Well, I'll find that again. It was David Ray something.
David something, but I'm hesitant to think I'm pronouncing the guy's name right. Velazco? Okay. I don't know.
If I find it, I'll say it. I just found it.
Okay, yeah, you can try it. You might do better than I do.
Oh, here, David Joseph Velazco. I think that seems about right. Yeah. So check that out if you guys want to follow this part of the conversation. Suicidal empathy.
It's great.
Did you have more to say about that, Deborah, or just wanted to call that out?
No, because I only just sort of started to read it today, so I can't comment on it because I didn't get around to finishing it. But I was seeing that people were talking about it. I'm like, oh, they read it too. Oh, they have the same Substack, whatever they read. Student
of Rhythm says, I had an eye-opener when someone told me most of the homeless in Salt Lake City aren't local. They come in from elsewhere. Even though a lot of gentrifying goes into the area, it's not the only cause. Yeah, I think I maybe have told you guys about this before, but I had this real eye-opener moment. This would have been maybe 2016, 2017, living in Seattle in the Green Lake neighborhood. And I was at a gas station, just filling up my gas, and a man walked towards me from the gas station itself. And he was walking directly towards me, and I thought he was an attendant and he was going to come tell me something. I mean, he was a good-looking young man, really just strolling right over purposefully. It didn't feel threatening at all. He just looked like a nice young guy. And he stopped right in front of me, bent over, and started rummaging through the trash, found a Slim Jim in the trash, stuck it in his mouth, kept rummaging through the trash. And this was just, I'm watching all of this, my mind is trying to understand what I'm seeing. And I realize he's one of these homeless guys from these tents that are all around. And this is in a time when we lived in this neighborhood, Green Lake. It's beautiful. It's so pretty. There's this pretty little lake that, and this big park around it with like a 3-mile running track around it. These little shops. There's old craftsman homes everywhere, cottages and stuff. We lived in a little 5-plex, modest little apartment, but it was beautiful. We had big windows. It was just such a pretty little place. And there were tents popping up everywhere, and the parks were starting to fill up with tents, and everything that we didn't have nailed down outside would be stolen off of our porch every single night. You know, one night I left a blanket out and the blanket was gone immediately. We had a little tent, we had a little hammock up. The hammock was stolen. All kinds of stuff would just be taken. And a Slim Jim, James from Bahia, what's a Slim Jim? It's just like a beef stick. He had like a beef jerky stick kind of thing. But he found something in the trash stuck in his mouth, and I had this realization: this is a healthy young person who's making a lifestyle choice. And I saw that over and over again. Sometimes you'd see people who seemed profoundly mentally ill or physically challenged in certain ways, and this is what had led to them being here. But then there were a lot of young people who just seemed to be saying, screw society, I'd rather do that. Maybe for drugs, maybe because they felt hopeless in what they were doing and found community and connection in this. But there's more to it than just sad people who fell through the cracks. There's also lifestyle choices being made, and I don't know, this is something it's very hard to talk about because there's so much empathy around this from people who just, and it's not just empathy, it's like this blind empathy. Like, we won't talk about the reality of this. We just want to, you're bad if you judge these people, poor them. So it's very hard to talk about.
I remember when I lived in Colorado, we had a little bit of a homeless problem, not so much, but there was a guy who used to just constantly hang out by the post office, and I had a post office box, and he would dress like a Ren Fair kind of, he was probably in his 70s, very old, and he not only didn't live anywhere, I remember him telling me, because he would chat, you get your mail and you start chatting, and he was like, I love my freedom, I don't want to have to live anywhere. And yet I still had the sense he was always asking people for money and other things, and he was kind of a character, so you kind of didn't mind it. But I remember that day when he just kind of said, like, I want my freedom. Somehow I got irritated. I was kind of like you're going to make us feel really bad for you, and then you're telling us that you actually love. Now, I don't know if he had been in a circumstance where maybe he had been in a shelter housing and it was actually horrendous and scary and unsafe, and you know what I mean? And you'd understand that. But he had so much joy of just like, I get to sleep under the stars. And I remember after that, because I think occasionally would give him money, I think I decided I didn't want to anymore.
Ray says, hey, Leslie, didn't Benjamin live in the forests around Evergreen when he studied there? Yeah, in a house, like in a neighborhood. Like, there's forests everywhere around here. So yes, but not in the wild. Yeah. Jennifer, sorry. Did you say something? You're muted, I think.
Benjamin was not unhoused.
Right.
No.
That's the politically correct term now. It's unhoused.
Unhoused.
Not homeless. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody said something about, it tugs at the heartstrings. Oh, a student of rhythm. I'll put it up. I've seen many homeless on UTA trains and camps in parks and unused areas. It tugs at the heart to see it, but you have to recognize human beings emotionally manipulate. Well, and not just manipulate, but also have self-destructive tendencies that we're not necessarily helping when we enable. We're not really.
Yes.
That's just something that goes on in every aspect of life. Homelessness is just one of these areas where you see it epitomized and sort of brought to its most extreme. But are we really helping people when we say, it's okay that you are tearing yourself apart? Here's the sandwich,
Yeah. I don't have, I lack the milk of human kindness to spend it. I'm not surrounded by it. It doesn't impact me on a daily basis, but I can't fathom that. Toxic empathy to me is one of the most destructive forces that we currently are being subjected to. I find it intolerable. I don't understand why anyone would waste their time worrying about some crazy person. I think there's literally, this comes down to boundaries. Okay, I can control my own feelings, I can control my own life, I can control my own circumstances up to a point, and who has the bandwidth to then worry about strangers and like try and get involved? I mean, there's a lot of street drinkers here, there's a lot of drug addicts here. You always see people trying to give them sandwiches and I'm just like, why are you meddling? If somebody is plummeting headfirst toward rock bottom, don't stop them. If someone's bleeding out in the street, call an ambulance, but you don't have to start getting all like, oh, I'll rescue you. It is such a terrible impulse. I find it And I mean, I think the toxic part is the more important part of the phrase rather than the empathy part, because you're trying to be a hero, you're trying to be a savior. I mean, I think of,
Yeah.
and I mean, Ireland, the south of Ireland has a terrible housing crisis, and there's a lot of families that have like two parents working in jobs, and they're losing their apartments because the rents are so damn high, as someone said in the comments. I mean, there's a lot of people who fall into that category of homelessness, um, because of the realities of the economy and inflation, et cetera, et cetera. So why? I mean, I'm not going to worry about some Looney Tune who wants to live under the stars. I mean, have at it. Just don't bother me. And I'm not going to shed a tear over your circumstances. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're reminding me of one other person too. I'm in New York, and like there's a guy, Central Park Yogi, and especially during COVID, like there'd be these empty blocks with nothing, and he just sprawled out a whole like camp. But he totally made it into, it was this lifestyle thing. Like, I'm a yogi, and he was practically making his own kombucha, like right next to his like pile of clothes. You know what I mean? And I was so annoyed with him. And I think he had like, he had like a Twitter account, but he take the block up. And I've seen him over on Broadway, so he sort of moved. But I knew he wasn't poor, and he wasn't.
Yeah.
It was kind of like performance art, something, making a statement, and I really had no patience for him. I never gave him anything.
Good.
Yeah, this mobile writer, thank you for the super chat, says the so-called empathy of woke progressives is armchair elitism. It's disingenuous, and it always has been. And that kind of,
Correct.
what you're saying,
100%.
something in what you're saying there, Jenny, and what mobile writer is saying, there's a bit of an arrogance in it. Like, why am I responsible for this other thing? I mean, reaching outside of yourself and telling other people what they ought to do and how they ought to pick themselves up. There's something in it's that elitism.
And it's also, but to me, it's like, it always is directed toward the wrong party. So people require empathy and compassion and assistance, like this, families living in cars, like those people require assistance. Why aren't you trying to help them? Like this idea of like the toxic empathy and the woke empathy is always directed to the targets that cannot receive it and cannot get better. Mm-hmm. It's never directed towards a place where it actually might better society.
David Moore says, how callous to assume all homeless people are there willfully or by their own bad choices. And I
literally just said the opposite of that.
Yeah, I don't assume that at all. I think that it's just, you can't put people in one category and assume much of anything about them. So saying homeless, and then we create all these ways to help the homeless. What about looking at people as individuals? When somebody needs help that individual. But to assume what they need is an entirely different thing altogether.
I also want to point out that commenter, I literally just said that there's a whole group of homeless people that are homeless due to realities of the economy that are beyond their control, and they even have jobs, and they have families, and they live in their cars. I literally just said the opposite of what that man just wrote that we were saying.
Well, and
I want to point out that often that people get triggered by when you're attacked, like when you're criticizing toxic empathy, they get triggered and they don't hear any of the nuance that you're trying to communicate.
Just to be fair, I think that comment might have been before you said that, so maybe your explanation there helped to clear that up for that commenter. But yeah, you're right. It is sort of a black and white take, and then you accuse people of being black and white. But it's it is a hard situation. I don't know what the answer is, but it's sort of like this disconnect when people become disconnected, and then other people try to figure out what to do with them and with each other, and how do we, as some kind of a state entity, come in and help another entity, that we start to label people in these big swaths. And it is very legalistic, Jay Bourne. Yes. But we do see this as, this. I think there's a bigger conversation about immigration that I hope we can have soon, because a lot of this is about migration, immigration, rootlessness, lack of family resource, lack of centeredness in a place when you've become disconnected from things. Whose responsibility are you if you're not your own? Whose are you?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Any final thoughts as we round down to the end of the conversation? It's kind of started with fires and it went into immigration and homelessness, but
I just want to comment on Andrew Joyner's comment. Have known some people where being homeless was a bit of a lifestyle choice. And that is what I found with a few people when I was working with that population, that there was a group that did prefer living that way, that didn't want to be housed and they didn't want to be indoors. They wanted to kind of be able to just sort of bounce around and have very little to no responsibility for bills, for rent or housing, for food, and just kind of wanted to live off the land, but through resources that we're all paying for through our taxes, because they're really not hunting for their own food and living off the land. They're actually just taking, right, what's being given, which is quite a bit. Yeah, so I'll leave that there. But yeah, it's a lifestyle for some.
yeah, absolutely. And Cody R., I know this is just a detail, but says that countless times I would be downtown with my mom and as a kid, and the homeless would come up and ask for money because they were hungry, and when my mom offered to buy them food, they'd cuss us out. Yeah, I've had that happen.
There you go.
As well in Seattle. I had a guy ask me for money on my way out of a Safeway once, and I said, sorry, I don't have any cash. I have some bagels though, if you'd like a bagel. He's sitting outside. He's like, I'm hungry. Could you just? And he says, well, what kind? And I said, I have a whole wheat and an everything bagel. And he goes, nah, never mind.
Can I add one last quick thing to that?
Yeah.
So I used to carry like food bars in my car because there were these sort of homeless people in Boulder at this one intersection. So if you're at the light, they come over, right? So I have my little protein bars, like I'm ready to hand it over, and then I give it to the person, and then they say to me, "Is this gluten free?" I don't know. I'm both ends. I was sort of like, if they really had a gluten allergy, it could make them sick. Right? But on the other hand, you're like asking for a handout, and you're gonna go, and then you're gonna go. Is it vegan? Is it like
Right?
That's hilarious.
There's this old cliche about a gift horse and
Yeah,
a mouth.
Oh yeah.
that is hilarious.
That is funny.
That's a good note to end on.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. Thank you for being in the chat. And thanks, ladies, for this conversation. Christine, stay safe. And we'll keep on watching and
Thank you.
and thinking about the people in California and just
Thank you.
so much loss right now. And Jenny, we didn't even get into the grooming gangs. And I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts on that. So maybe next week we can have some
Okay.
time to devote to that.
Yeah, I actually wrote a Substack about it, not last weekend, but the weekend before. So that's worth visiting.
Yeah, well, go
Great.
check out Jenny's Substack, and that'll be part of what we use for the conversation next week. So have a great week, everybody.
Good.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.